Hello there gamers, and welcome back to another epic Inexorable video. In this video we're taking a look at deriving one of my favourite formulas ever, the quadratic formula. Bit basic for a favourite formula, but actually I really like it. So I say basic, but I mean 5 videos in you'll understand we're going to get very used to this formula. So I don't want to call it basic just yet, but we're going to derive it. So what is the quadratic formula? I'm going to write it down so you know what it is, so you know what our end goal is. The quadratic formula is x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, it's all underneath the square root, all divided by 2a, just like that. That is the quadratic formula. Now, let's actually sort of explain what we're doing here. Basically, what the quadratic formula does is, we've been looking at solving quadratic equations, right? We've been trying to figure out how to solve a quadratic equation. Basically, we've been looking at equations like these and saying, let's figure out what x is. Now, you might be wondering, hold on a second, why do we need to do all this weird stuff with like brackets and finding two numbers that times to make blah 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 and add to make blah blah blah? Why do we need to do that when we can just make x the subject? If we make x the subject, that is, makes x equals a bunch of stuff, then we can just plug a, b and c in. So why don't we do it? Well, there isn't a reason why we can't just do that, and we are going to do that. The reason why we didn't do it earlier is because we didn't have the skills to do it, because to derive this formula here, you need to know how to complete the square, and that's the important thing. So, this only works when our quadratic equation is equal to 0. So normally, we're in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b and c are fixed numbers, and of course, x is a variable, okay? That's just normal, we know that. But it has to be when y is 0, okay? It has to be. Otherwise, you can't solve it, because then you have two variables, x and y. You can't do it. So basically, there's no reason why we can't solve this. So let's just solve it, guys, okay? Without further ado, let's begin. So, the first lot of steps is actually just to derive the formula for completing the square. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we've literally got another video dedicated to it. So that's the introduction to completing the square video if you're not familiar with it. In that video, we're going to derive the formula that we're just about to derive. The quadratic formula is just going a step further. So without further ado, let's just do that. So let's say that 0 is equal to a times x squared plus b over ax plus c over a. That should be a trivial move at this point because we've seen it already, and using our expanding knowledge, we must agree this and this are the same thing. Perfect. Next step. Okay, 0 is still equal to a times, and now we're going to complete the square on this bit. So, like always, we're going to add half of the b value, this is actually b over a, but half of the middle value, half of the value with an x in front of it. So half of b over a is b over 2a. We're going to close that square, we're going to actually square it, and now we know that if we expand this part out, we will get x squared plus b over ax plus b squared over 4a squared. So if you square this, you will get this, okay? So that means, because we want the x squared and we want the b over a, we don't want b squared over 4a squared, we want c over a. So we're going to add our c over a, because that was there already, but we're going to take away b squared over 4a squared because we don't want it, because this generates another b squared over 4a squared. We don't want it, so we're going to have to take it away again. Okay, I hope again that makes sense. We do have another video on this, okay? That is all being times by a, because all we've done is looked at this and we've turned this into this, but there's still an a here, okay? So next step is we're going to expand out by a once more. Like this, okay? So all I've done is I've gone a times this is just a times, you can't simplify that. Then a times c over a is the same thing as just c, right? Because it's c times a divided by a, that's just c. And then a times b squared over 4a squared is the same thing as b squared over 4a without the squared, okay? Excuse me, because an a here has cancelled out with an a here, so we've just got one a there. That looks kind of like a u, it's an a. Okay, this is the formula for completing the square. We've seen it already, that's the conclusion that we got to. You can put brackets there if you want to, you don't have to. There's no reason why you should, but some people like it, you can put brackets there. That doesn't change anything. Okay. So now we're going to take it a step further, guys, because this is not completing the square, this is the quadratic formula. We haven't made x the subject yet, but I want you to notice something. Right now, we've just got one x. In this whole problem, there's one x and it's there. There's no other x's. Whereas before, there's two x's. That makes things very tricky, especially since one of them's being squared, very difficult to factorize. Here we go, boom, 1x, okay. So let's just move everything that isn't x onto the other side, right? So let's do it step by step. 0 is equal to, now, actually, we won't even say 0 is equal to, we're gonna just take all of this away. So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna remove these brackets because I don't wanna get confusing. So again, brackets don't change anything. So what we're gonna do is we don't want b squared over 4a. So we're going to add b squared over 4a to both sides. So we're going to say b squared over 4a is equal to a times x plus b over 2a all squared plus c. So we've added b squared over 4a to both sides, right? Because 0 plus b squared over 4a is b squared over 4a, and minus b squared over 4a plus b squared over 4a is just 0. So it's kind of like plus 0, right? But we don't need to write it because plus 0 doesn't mean anything. Okay, let's do something else. I'm going to come over here now, guys. I'm going to go sideways a little bit. Now, we don't want a c either. So we're going to take c away from both sides because we don't want the c. We're trying to get x on its own on the right-hand side. So let's say that b squared over 4a minus c is equal to a times x plus b over 2a all squared plus 0, because c minus c is 0, okay? And 0 plus c, or rather b squared over 4a, minus c, is b squared over 4a minus c. All we're doing is taking c away from both sides, okay? So now we've got this, okay, looking good. Now, I'm actually going to divide both sides by a, because this is being times by an a. I don't really want it to be times by an a, so we're going to divide by a. So let's divide this side by a. That is going to be b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Both of these are just being divided by a c. And that is going to be equal to, well, what's this divided by a? Well, they just cancel out, and you just get x plus b over 2a squared. Hope you can see that on the end. Okay, now we've got this. This is good. Now, what's happening? Well, actually, first things first, let's actually simplify the left, because it looks a bit gross. It looks a bit sussy at the moment, guys. So, to add fractions, what do? Okay, or to subtract them, it's the same thing. They have to have the same denominator, don't they? So here is a denominator which is 4a squared. Here is a denominator which is just a. So let's times the c over a fraction by, well, not times, but let's just, well, I'll write it over here actually. So b squared over 4a squared is valid. And this is being, we're minusing, well, c over a. How else can you write c over a? You can write c over a as 4ac over 4a squared. Now, why would we do that? Because look, some of those a's cancel out. One a cancels out with that a. The 4's cancel out, and you just get left with c over a again. So that will simplify to c over a, which is there. So c over a is the same thing as 4ac over 4a squared. The reason we've done that, the reason we've chosen 4s and whatnot, is because now they have the same denominator. So I'm going to write this as one fraction. That fraction is going to be b squared minus 4ac all over the denominator, which was 4a squared. That is one thing. And that is still equal to x plus b over a squared. Or b over 2a rather. Okay, now what should we do? Well, x plus b over 2a, that's being squared. We shouldn't square it, we should have that being square rooted because I don't want that 2 up there. I don't want it to be squared. So let's just square root both sides. The square root of this looks difficult, it's not. Let's take this, remember when we take the square root of a fraction, we take the square root of the top and then the bottom. So let's take the square root of the top. The square root of b squared minus 4ac is the square root of b squared minus 4ac. That's all you can do with it, guys. You can't write that any simpler. The square root of 4a squared, you can write that simpler. The square root of 4a squared is 2a because 2 squared is 4 and a squared is a squared. Now, here's something that's a little bit crazy. When you take the square root of something, remember the positive and negative version of that can multiply by itself to make what we had over here. So we need to introduce a plus or minus. This notation literally means it's either plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Just like how if I said to you, what number times is by itself to make 25, you would say plus or minus 5, because both of those times by themselves to make 25. So it makes sense that both positive and negative b squared over 4ac, the square root of that, will multiply by itself to make b squared minus 4ac. That makes sense, okay? So plus or minus literally just means plus or minus what we've got right there, okay? So it's either plus or minus, okay, that's perfect. And that is going to be equal to the square root of x plus b over 2a squared. Well, the square root of something that's being squared is just the thing in the middle, or the thing without the square on it, right? So it's like the square root of 5 squared. Well, 5 basically. So we're just going to write, actually we don't even need a bracket, x plus b over 2a. That's literally it, guys. Okay. Now, we're kind of chilling, because guess what we're going to do? We want x, we don't want x plus b over 2a, so we're going to take b over 2a away from both sides. So, I'm going to say, now what I'm going to do is a little bit crazy. I'm going to take b over 2a from both sides, but I'm actually going to write it on the left-hand side of this, not on the right-hand side, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to write, if I can, I don't want to get in the way, I'm going to write minus b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. That means 4 times a times c over 2a. The reason I've written it on this side is because it's kind of, you can see the minus b is on the left-hand side anyway. So now, this is still valid because this is a takeaway, so that's what we're doing. And now, and that's equal to x. Good, we've got x on its own. These have the same denominator, so we can add them or subtract them, depending on what you call it. But this is simply going to be minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, because this was over 2a and this was over 2a, so now they're both over 2a. Perfect. So this is still equal to x. Brilliant. Okay, that is the quadratic formula. Okay, guys, we derived it. As you can see, it's up here too. I've written the x on the other side, doesn't actually matter. In the next video, we're going to look at questions involving the quadratic formula, but for now, that's all you need to know. This is undoubtedly one of the most important formulas in all of mathematics. Undoubtedly. It is arguably the most important formula that you should memorize for A-level maths, in my opinion. There's a lot of important formulas, but this is one of them for sure. This is top 5 easily. Remember this formula. Remember it. Just remember it. Doesn't matter whether you get it in the formula booklet, whether it's built into your calculator, just remember that formula. There is a YouTube video with a nice song about it that I might put in the description of the video, but that is the quadratic formula, and this is how you derive it.